At my brother's wedding, his best man looked right at me and said, "You still living in your mom's basement, loser?" Then my ex shouted, "He cried when I dumped him." And everyone burst into laughter except his fiancée. At my brother's wedding, standing just a few feet from the head table, holding a glass of water I didn't really want, I became the punchline of a joke that wasn't even funny. Terrence, my brother's best man, turned to me in front of over 100 guests and grinned with the smugness of a man who never learned to read a room. "You're still living in your mom's basement, loser?" he asked, loud enough for the people at the far table to hear. The laughter came in bursts, like fireworks, loud, sharp, and unexpected. And before I could even react, my ex-wife, Cassidy, who was standing next to the bride, chimed in, "He cried when I dumped him." The laughter grew. People slapped their tables, nudged each other, leaned in to whisper God knows what. Everyone was enjoying the show. Everyone but Amelia, Darren's bride, who turned her head slowly toward my brother with a look I can only describe as not surprised, but disappointed, maybe even disgusted. And in that exact moment, something inside me, some part one thought was long since worn down by years of swallowing pride and pretending not to care, just snapped. I stood there, burning up, and knew it was time. Time to stop letting everyone pretend that I was just some failure sleeping in his childhood bed, some jobless, bitter divorcee with nothing left to show. They thought they were laughing at nobody. They didn't realize they were standing in the house I helped build. It was a mistake to agree to come, and I knew at the moment I stepped into the lodge. The wedding was being held at a high-end rustic venue just outside Asheville. Iron chandeliers, polished hardwood floors, and a panoramic view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was the kind of place where servers wore bow ties and the bathrooms smelled like eucalyptus. The kind of place I'd helped my brother secure when he couldn't get approved for the loan on his own. I kept to myself mostly, not because I didn't want to engage, but because every conversation felt like I was being quietly measured and found lacking. The cousins I hadn't seen in years would approach with tilted heads and tight smiles, throwing out phrases like "still getting back on your feet," or, "I always thought you'd be doing something big by now." No malice, just condescension wearing a polite face. Terrence, of course, didn't bother with subtlety. We'd crossed paths in the hallway the night before the wedding, and instead of a greeting, he smirked and said, "Damn, Ray. Thought you'd at least crawl out of that basement for good by now." I shrugged it off with a forced smile, but his tone sat with me like a weight I couldn't shake. He was exactly the kind of guy Darren had always been drawn to: confident, loud, charismatic in a superficial way. The type who always managed to land on his feet because he never stayed in one place long enough to face consequences. What made it worse was seeing Cassidy there. She looked exactly how she always did, put together, elegant, knowing. She wore the same scent I used to compliment her on back when we were still married. I hadn't seen her since the divorce, not really. She'd unfollowed me, blocked me, and made a clean break. But apparently she and Darren had stayed in touch, because there she was, seated beside Amelia at the rehearsal dinner, laughing like she belonged there. I avoided her that night. I found a quiet corner with a warm bourbon and a cooler silence, watching people drift between tables. Darren didn't even come talk to me until the speeches started, and even then, it was all surface level. "Glad you made it," he said, not looking me in the eye. I just nodded. Wouldn't miss it. That wasn't true. I would have gladly missed it. But there was something about the lodge, about the venue, that felt necessary. I needed to see how he handled it. How he stood there pretending he'd done it all on his own, without even a passing mention of how I'd co-signed on the business loan he needed to reserve the place. He never told Amelia. I knew that. It was clear from the way she proudly told everyone at the rehearsal dinner how Darren made it all happen. The reception the next day started off like most weddings: photos, drinks, music, awkward small talk. I stayed back, doing what I've gotten good at, not drawing attention. But even shadows can't hide when people are looking for someone to mock. Terrence's toast started off predictably. Jokes about college, Darren's bad fashion in his early 20s, some story about a Vegas trip that had everyone howling. I didn't laugh, but I didn't wince either. Until he turned, mid-speech, and locked eyes with me. "And let's not forget Darren's older brother, Ray," he said, raising his glass. "Still keeping the family basement warm, eh? Legend has it he hasn't seen sunlight since 2020. The laughter was immediate. Then Cassidy's voice rang out from behind Amelia. "He cried when I dumped him." That one hurt. It really, really hurts. Not just because she said it, but because she knew it would land. Because she knew how much of me she still held in the palm of her hand, and she squeezed. I don't know what made me look at Amelia at that moment. Maybe it was instinct. But what I saw surprised me. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't even smiling. She had turned her head slightly, her lips pressed into a line, and she was staring directly at Darren, whose face had gone pale. And right there, in the middle of clinking glasses and roaring laughter, I knew she had questions. Maybe not yet, but soon. And once those questions started, they wouldn't stop. I set down my glass, pushed back my chair, and stood up. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't even sure I'd say anything. But my legs moved before my brain caught up. Darren saw me walking toward the mic, and his eyes widened slightly. Not in fear. In warning. "Ray," he murmured under his breath, almost too quietly to hear. But I kept walking. I stood at the mic, took a deep breath, and scanned the room. My voice was calm when I spoke. I wasn't planning on saying anything tonight. I figured I'd just be here to support my little brother on his big day. But after that warm introduction from Terrence and Cassidy, I thought maybe I should clear the air a bit. A few chuckles. Some whispers. I kept going. I know some of you probably think I'm just that guy. The brother who never left home, who's still stuck in neutral while everyone else moves on. And sure, it's easy to laugh when that's the version of the story you've been told. I looked at Darren then. His jaw clenched. But here's a version you might not have heard, I continued. A couple years ago, Darren called me late one night. His job offer in Atlanta had fallen through. He was behind on his loans, and he needed help. So, I did what brothers do. I gave him 15 grand. No contract. No interest. Just faith. The room began to shift. Last year, when he and Amelia found this venue and couldn't get the loan approved on their own, I co-signed for it. Again, no questions asked, because I believed in him. Now it was silent. Every glass was still. Every fork frozen midair. But I guess when someone lives in a basement, it's easy to pretend they don't matter. I didn't look at Cassidy. I didn't need to. Amelia's face had changed. She was looking at Darren like he was a stranger. And Darren? He looked like a man whose secrets had just been dragged into the light. The silence after I stepped down from the mic was deafening, not the kind of awkward pause you get when someone fumbles a toast, but the kind where people don't know if they're supposed to clap or say something or pretend it didn't just happen. I didn't care. I walked past stunned faces and clinking glasses that had suddenly stopped midair. Even the DJ, who had been hovering near the soundboard with a playlist queued up, didn't hit play. I wasn't angry anymore. I was beyond it. I'd been humiliated in front of people I once considered family, treated like a joke by someone I used to love, and used by a brother I had always protected. But what I felt now wasn't rage. It was clear. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding behind silence. I had said what needed to be said. I walked out of the reception hall and into the evening air. It was late summer in Asheville, humid, with that heavy scent of damp pine and cut grass. The mountains were dark silhouettes against the sky, the last light clinging to the horizon. I needed air like I needed distance. I needed to breathe somewhere that wasn't filled with eyes judging me. I leaned against the railing that wrapped around the deck of the lodge. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from release. It felt like I'd been carrying an invisible weight for years and had finally set it down in front of everyone to see. Behind me, I heard the soft creak of a door. Footsteps. I didn't turn. "Ray," Amelia said quietly. Her voice was low but steady. I glanced back at her. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, the train of her wedding dress brushing against the wood planks. Her expression wasn't soft. It wasn't kind. It was controlled. "I didn't know," she said. I nodded. I figured. She hesitated. "Is all of that true?" I met her eyes. Every word. Her jaw tightened. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she looked out over the railing. He never mentioned a loan or the co-signing. He told me his parents helped him with the down payment. He made it sound like he'd pulled himself out of debt years ago. I gave a short laugh. "That's Darren. I thought he was honest with me," she said, her voice cracking just slightly at the edges. "I've been with him for 5 years, Ray. 5 years. And I'm finding out this now, tonight, from his brother, at our wedding reception." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Not for what I said, but for how it had to happen. She looked back at the glowing windows of the reception hall. "People are going to ask questions." "They should," I said, "because he's been feeding them a story that just isn't true." Amelia didn't respond. Instead, she reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out her phone. She scrolled, then stopped. Without a word, she handed it to me. It was a message thread between her and Cassidy. Apparently, they'd been texting the past few weeks, coordinating decorations and guest seating. One message stood out. "Cassidy, 1 week ago, just make sure Ray doesn't get drunk and weird. You know he still thinks the world owes him something. Darren's the real success story in that family. I handed it back. She's good at rewriting history too, I said. Amelia stared at the screen, then slid the phone away. I didn't invite her. Darren insisted. Said they stayed close after your divorce. I didn't ask why she'd allowed it. Maybe she trusted Darren the way I used to. That was the problem with trust. It was easy to give, hard to take back. More footsteps behind us. This time it was Darren. He looked flushed, chest rising fast like he'd just run up the stairs. Amelia, he said quickly, eyes darting between the two of us. Can we talk? She didn't answer. He turned to me. What the hell was that? I told the truth. That wasn't your place. I shook my head. You made it my place when you let them laugh at me. When you stood there and let your best man mock me in front of our entire family, after everything I've done for you. He ran a hand through his hair. You could have handled that differently. So could you, Amelia said sharply, and Darren flinched like she'd slapped him. Her voice was colder now. Why didn't you tell me about the loan? Or that Ray helped you buy this place? Because it wasn't a big deal, she cut him off. Don't lie to me, Darren. He looked stunned. I didn't lie. I just didn't think it mattered anymore. I stepped back. This wasn't my moment to control. I'd said what I needed to say. What happened next was between them. But I was watching. And so was the truth. Darren reached for her hand. She pulled it away. You lied by omission, she said. For years. You let me think this image of you was real. You let me plan a wedding in a venue that your brother helped pay for. And you didn't even have the decency to acknowledge it. It's our day, he said weakly. No, she said, steady now. It's yours. She walked past him, the lace of her dress catching slightly on the deck. She didn't go back inside. She went down the stairs and around the corner toward the lodge's garden path. Darren stood there, frozen. Then he looked at me. I'll pay you back. I'm not asking for it. He swallowed. I mean it. I'll transfer it tonight. I'm not asking for it, I repeated. But if you want to fix things, don't start with me. Start with her. He didn't move. I turned and walked back inside. The music had started again, but it was softer now. Polite. The kind of background music you use to fill a room where no one knows what to say. People were talking, but quieter. Some eyes followed me as I passed, curious, cautious. No one laughed now. And at the far end of the room, Cassidy stood alone by the bar, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything as I passed her, but I could feel her watching me. She knew it too. Everything had changed. Inside the lodge, the energy had shifted. The crowd had split into little clusters, some whispering, some avoiding eye contact altogether. Whatever buzz the open bar had ignited was fading fast. I saw a few people glancing at their watches. The illusion had cracked, and with it, the curated version of my brother's life was now out in the open, like a ripped suit that no one could quite mend fast enough. Darren hadn't followed me back in. Amelia hadn't come back either. The bride and groom had disappeared, and their absence was louder than any speech or toast could have been. I wasn't even sure why I stayed. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe, just maybe, I was finally tired of letting people write me out of the narrative. Cassidy approached me near the dessert table. She looked unsettled. Still polished, still poised, but there was a tightness around her eyes now. I didn't think you had that in you, she said, sipping from a glass of red wine. I shrugged. That's the thing about being underestimated. It makes the punch land harder. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly. Look, I know I crossed a line earlier. I shouldn't have said what I did. I was trying to be funny. You weren't, I said flatly. She gave a tight laugh, more out of discomfort than humor. You're right. It was low. I guess I was trying to put space between us. You know, make sure no one thought we still had anything unresolved. I raised an eyebrow. You were standing next to the bride. What else would people think? Cassidy looked away, guilty. Then she said, more softly, I heard what you said up there. About helping Darren. About the loan. Yeah, I didn't know all that. Most people don't, I said. Because I didn't make it a story. I just did what I thought was right. She looked at me with something almost like regret. You've changed. No, I said. I just stopped letting people pretend I hadn't done anything worth remembering. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something more, but I was already done with the conversation. She knew it too. For the first time in years, I felt like the one who'd walked away, without begging, without needing her approval, and without looking back. I went outside again just as Amelia was returning from the garden path. Her makeup was slightly smudged, but her posture was strong. She nodded at me as she passed. Not a thank you. Not yet. But an acknowledgement. She would take care of what needed to be taken care of. Darren followed not long after, walking slower, his jacket off, his face tense. He didn't speak to me. Didn't make eye contact. Just walked to the bar and ordered something stiff. The rest of the reception continued on autopilot. People danced, the DJ returned to his usual routine, and the staff began serving cake like nothing had happened. But you could feel it, the absence of magic. The bride and groom didn't dance. There was no garter toss. The party had been gutted, and no one knew how to put it back together. And I was okay with that. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the bank. The business loan for the lodge had been paid off. Fully. Attached was a copy of the release form, officially removing me as a co-signer. I stared at it for a long time, letting it settle in. It wasn't just about money. It was freedom, legal, emotional, symbolic. It meant I no longer had to carry someone else's burden. I had finally been written out of Darren's financial success, and for once, it was a good thing. An hour after the email, Darren texted me. A short message. Paid you back. You won't hear from me for a while. I need to figure some things out. That was fine by me. A week after that, Amelia messaged me. She and Darren had decided to delay their honeymoon and start couples therapy. She didn't say much more than that, only that she appreciated the honesty and that what I said made her realize how much she didn't know about the man she'd almost tied her life to. And then came the final shift. I got a job offer. One of Darren's college friends, who'd been at the wedding and heard everything, owned a mid-size IT firm in Asheville. He reached out after the reception and said, I didn't realize you had that kind of background, and clearly, you've handled things most wouldn't have. I wasn't sure if it was pity or respect, but I took the meeting. 2 weeks later, I was hired as a project manager. Good pay. Decent hours. A team that listened. Not bad for a guy who was, until recently, still living under his mom's roof. With that job, I was able to move out. Nothing fancy, just a modest 2-bedroom rental near downtown. Close enough to see the mountains, far enough from my mother's basement to breathe like a man again. Here's the thing. Revenge isn't always about public humiliation or some grand takedown. Sometimes, it's just about reclaiming your space, setting the record straight, watching the people who wrote you off realize they got the story wrong. I didn't scream. I didn't punch anyone. I didn't cut ties or post rants online. I simply told the truth and let it do the work. Darren learned that reputation is fragile. Cassidy learned that quiet people aren't always weak. And I learned that sometimes, rock bottom is the foundation you need to build something real. So yeah, maybe I was the guy who cried when his wife left and moved back into his childhood bedroom. But now, I'm the guy who stood up, told the truth, and walked away clean. And that, in the end, was enough.